Hello everyone, it's very nice to be back with you. It's been a little while. I tend to record these videos when I'm at home processing images, and I'm pleased to have been away shooting images. So as a result, we haven't had any updates for a little while. But this is the beginning, hopefully, of a number of weeks in a row where I'll be able to share images as I start to process pictures from those recent trips, most notably to Raja Ampat in December and the Cayman Islands in January. So I'm going to crack on into these ones and show you some of my new or newly processed images. The first, though, is a picture from 2019, which is this one here. Let me click on it. Of a dugong, and this is sort of a wider shot with a dugong in it. If this was the only shot I'd got from that shoot, I wouldn't be very happy. But because I've got lots of close-up shots, it's quite nice to have an image like this, sort of a scene-setting shot, as it were, showing the dugong in the big blue as a starting point. I like the two golden trevallies in this picture. I think that works well. But yeah, if it was my only picture, I'd be pretty disappointed with it. As always, I'm going to leave the camera data here on the right-hand side of the screen. So when I do show you this screen, you can at least see what my camera settings and everything like that I was using on the trip. I think all the pictures here are taken, or certainly all the new pictures here are taken with either Nikon D850 or a Sony A7R4V, which is what I was shooting on my last trip in Cayman. It was a borrowed camera, and I'll talk about that in a little bit when we get to those Cayman pictures. Right, so I've only just started processing pictures from the Raja Ampat trip to Missoul Resort, and most of them are actually from the EMWL1, because that's what I've had a chance to process so far. So these are some shots from the EMWL1. That's Nauticam's kind of bug eye, wide angle macro fisheye lens. So this is kind of a wide angle shot, but where the main subject is a tiny Christmas tree worm. So you can see the Christmas tree worm, and then you can see the sort of silhouetted reef behind it. Just kind of shows what the EMWL1 can do. I'm very much looking forward to getting that lens to Lembe later in the year. This picture here is a picture of a Malabar grouper. It was a really big fish, and it was being cleaned by shrimps under the jetties at dusk in Missoul. And the MWL1 here was just a really good way of getting close to it. It was sort of not the friendliest of fish, but because the lens sticks out a long way, I was able to hold the camera out ahead of me and get the wide-angle lens relatively close to it to create this quite dramatic shot. It was very dark when I was taking this picture, so I pushed this out to a 1.6 second exposure to just get a bit of blue coming through in the background to create some depth in the image. I would say that, obviously the background is blurred. I was shooting at 1.6 seconds. You get a sense of the background, but it's blurred. The fish isn't blurred, though, because the fish was really in the darkness, and the only light hitting that fish was the instantaneous flash. So the fish is nice and sharp. Everywhere where the flashes hit and there wasn't much daylight was sharp. And there is blur, obviously, where all the blue is, where the blue light, ambient light, was coming in. But I don't mind that. I think it was worth it to get that feeling of depth in the frame. That said, at the time, I wasn't very confident that I would get sharp pictures. So most of the pictures, I sped the shutter speed up to a much faster shutter speed. And that enabled me and that enabled me to get sharp shots, but obviously without the background. So this picture here is taken with a fast shutter speed. I was able to get closer to the grouper in this particular time. You can see that it's kind of really like I was able to get just a little bit closer, but I didn't risk the long exposures. It was a relatively fleeting opportunity anyway, so I didn't really do much. Straight after the grouper, I bumped into this young green turtle, and who was fascinated by the dome diffusers on my flash guns. And was wanting to eat them, thinking they were jellyfish. I think because there was nothing else really sticking out the front of my camera. It didn't look like a normal underwater camera with the MWL on the front. So the turtle was busy trying to eat the dome diffusers on my retras. And that enabled me to get these nice close-up shots of the face of the turtle as it was swimming around. And I processed this shot just because it made me laugh, because it's actually inside of the mouth of the turtle. And you can actually, turtles have these these sort of spines on their tongue, which they use for gripping and ripping their food, and you can actually see these in this photo. Green turtles don't have lots of them, but it's I just thought it's the only time I've ever got a photo of that in a turtle, and that's because the turtle was trying to eat the lens at the time. So I got the lens right inside the turtle's mouth because it's a very small lens, the EMWL. Given how expensive it is, I probably should have been a bit more careful, not let the turtle try and eat it. This is a sunset split shot taken in Mosul as well, just taken literally 10 meters from where the turtle and the grouper were, but on a different dive. This photo here, I'm not 100% happy with it. The reef doesn't really have a main key graphical feature. It's kind of a little bit, lots of little bits and pieces. Nice coral, but it could do with a stronger central feature. And the silhouette of the island behind is quite blurred. It wasn't a mega long exposure. It was a 15th of a second, which is obviously quite slow, and that's why it's blurred. But normally I would say I'd be able to hold still for that sort of length of time. Except the problem here was that I was doing a split level photo, and I was over coral, so I couldn't put my feet down anywhere to get stable. I was floating on the surface and lifting the camera out of the water to make this picture, and that's a very hard maneuver to do. It's really hard on your neck and shoulders to lift the camera up while floating on the surface of the sea. And as a result, I didn't really get as sharp a top side as I would like to. So, but I still like the colours and the feel of the picture. So I've processed it out, although I probably wouldn't submit it to the library because of its technical flaws. And it is, anyway. This is a shot I've processed out from Raja Ampat that I rather like. This is a magenta dotty back. And they're relatively common little dotty back on the reefs in Raja Ampat. They certainly always remind me of Raja Ampat. I don't know if they're endemic to just Raja Ampat, but I always associate them with Raja Ampat. These little purple little fish that look really cool on the reef. They're usually quite shy. Not unphotographable, but not an easy subject to work. But this particular individual was very curious about me, and kept popping out and looking at me. And particularly luckily for me, he lived in a crevice in the reef like they all do. But this guy's little hole was completely surrounded by this lovely orangey sponge. So every time he popped out, he just popped into this perfect frame. And I got a whole series of very similar shots of him in slightly different poses coming out of this hole in the reef, surrounded by this lovely sponge. So I was very, very happy with this opportunity. Right, this is a photo that I processed before going to Raja Ampat. Obviously, before any workshop, I usually process a few new pictures to use in talks and things to illustrate points. This is taken at a dive site called Jolatia, which is a dive site that only Mosul Resort tend to dive. It's a small pinnacle in the Bu Fiabarchet chain of islands, which are very famous for diving. And there's lots and lots of wonderful dive sites there. And this is just a slightly smaller one, but very, very packed with fish, very, very packed with coral. It's very sort of, I'd say, a concentrated dive site. And I like this picture because the jacks were hunting the schooling fish. And there's a kind of, and the schools have formed into tight balls defensively. So there's a ball of fusiliers at the back, then a ball of silversides, and then a ball of convict blennies in the foreground. So I quite like all those layers. Not a perfect composition, but I still think it's a pleasing image. I like the colour and the shapes in the picture, and the energy, of course, with all that action going on. A not so exciting frame here. This is just a detail shot of sponges, encrusting sponge growing, probably on a man-made object. I forget now. But yeah, you sort of get these very flat growth patterns when new objects go into the ocean and they get colonized. So it's probably because it's in Raja Ampat on the leg of a wooden leg of a jetty or something like that. I don't remember, but where it's from. So the next picture is also from Raja Ampat, I think in Algerie Bay. This is a Lophiocarian frogfish, so one of the more unusual types of frogfish. It's not a particularly good picture. I think, in fact, it's quite a poor picture. But I don't have a lot of coverage of this species. I'd never actually processed a picture from this species before because I think I was pretty unimpressed by the shots beforehand. So I just processed this one out. I saw it when I was scrolling through, looking for something else, and thought, you know what, I should probably have some coverage of that species. This is an aggressive white damselfish, the ones that are the algae farmers, and this one's barking his displeasure at me for going near his algae patch. And next up, actually in the Philippines, so these are just kind of a few older images that I've processed for some reason or another. This is a dragon shrimp. I think this one's got a belly full of eggs, and on its wire coral there. I think it's got a nice backlight effect. I think I'd never bothered to process this at the time. Probably, I suspect, this probably had a fair bit of scatter in the background because of the backlighting. And I just couldn't be bothered to process it before. But now with subject selection and background selection in Lightroom, it's so easy just to background select and then just darken it down, all the backscatter disappears in 1 second. That's probably why I spotted it and thought, oh gosh, at the time that was a pain to process, and now it's so fast that it's super easy to process. Right, the rest of the pictures are all from my January trip to Cayman, and they're all taken with the Sony A7R5 camera, the new Sony camera, and I always had the first housing for that camera to try it in on that trip, so that was lots of fun to try that camera. And I've written both a review for WetPixel, and we've done a WetPixel Live video about it as well, although we had some sound recording problems on it, so it's not it's not the best video to watch, but it's full of good information, and there's a few of the first pictures I've processed out for that, quite a few of them actually just for that review. This is a yellow tube sponge shot with inward lighting, shot with the beam restrictors for the retro flash guns. Really make a difference when doing inward lighting, I think. People often call them macro rings, but for me they're really, they're beam restrictors, and they've got usage both for wide angle and macro images. This is a super macro shot taken with the SMC1 of a golden rough head blenny, and I think the next shot is the more standard colour form of the rough head blenny. And both of these are taken with the retro snoot, using the smallest aperture size for that. So it's just kind of a pinprick of light falling on the subject, creating this kind of tiny spotlight effect. I was just playing around with them, really. We have a macro site, there's lots of them, it's easy to do those shots. Then, unusually for me, some circular fisheye shots. My main fisheye lenses have circular fisheye capability. I just never want to use it. But on this particular morning, I decided I'd give it a go. And this is taken with the Matty Smith dome, which is a sort of an extra large split level dome. But here I'd push the whole dome underwater to be able to get a completely underwater shot of this stingray. And this is more what I had the dome on for doing split level shots. This was in the early morning with the sunrise and a bit of flash underwater to light up the ray. This picture here is now also the fisheye, but now just fixed at 15. I only had the zoom gear on for that one dive, so that one snorkel with the stingrays. The rest of the time I had the lens on just at 15mm, and I had it taped at 15mm so it wouldn't budge. I wrapped some tape around it so it wouldn't move, and I just used it as a straight 15mm. But the 8 to 15, both Nikon and Canon, but in this case the Canon, are very good lenses. So I prefer to use them over some of the other fisheyes, even if I'm never actually going to zoom them. This picture here is the bow of the kittiwake, and actually we were shooting this setup as a group. So the whole of the workshop, we sort of lined up at this bow, and we would take it in turns to swim forward and do a shot, and then swim back in the group. That way everyone gets a lovely clean shot without people in the picture, and one model can model for a whole boat full of people. And we just did this for the first 20 minutes or so of the dive until everyone had got the bow shots they wanted, and then people went off and did their own thing. And so Sam is modelling here, and I was very fortunate because when it was my turn to swim to the front of the group, I swam to the front of the group, and this school of horse-eyed jacks, which you can see on the left-hand side, swam into the picture. And so I got that extra element that really sort of helped my shot, and it was just pure fortune. The reason I processed the picture in black and white is that I think that these jacks in blue, they were a little bit lost in the background, whereas in black and white they really stood out. This is another model shot with Sam. Actually on this dive we were trying to get photos with a grouper that's friendly, a Nassau grouper that's on this particular dive site and very friendly at the time. And we were hanging around this sponge hoping that the grouper would come over and see us. But instead of the grouper, this snapper swam along, and we quickly grabbed this shot. The snapper was not staying posing, it was swimming through. And Sam did very well to get into a decent pose in the fraction of a second that we had while this snapper suddenly swam into frame. This picture here is an EMWL shot taken with the EMWL 160 of a territorial 3-spot damselfish. And this particular individual also had eggs, so he was feeling extra territorial as he defended the eggs that the female had laid in his territory. But yeah, really sort of good subject for that. There's not a lot of subjects for the EMWL in Cayman. It's more of a muck diving lens, and I'm really looking forward to getting it into Cayman in a few weeks' time. You can see how big these files are from the thing. 9,500 pixels across. So they're monster files. You zoom in on them, they just zoom in and zoom in and zoom in. Yeah, so really a lot of resolution in the picture, even with the MWL. Right, Another picture that I processed just really for the review. This is a Schoolmaster snapper that was underneath this overhang, which is why it's got this red coloration. They often darken up when they're under overhangs. And this one suddenly just decided to swim out of the overhang, but swim out over my head. And I put this picture into the review because it was a great example of how even in a low light situation, the camera was able to track the fish swimming directly at the camera reasonably quickly. And it was just a really good example of a picture. I think most people can look at that fish and see that it's clearly swimming. It's it's a pretty clumsy composition. Doesn't have a nice balance the frame, but the fact that the camera kept it in focus I thought was interesting. So I processed it out for the review. This is a big wide reef scene shot against the sun, so a real big test for the strobes to be able to light a scene like this. I'd also say that the EVF on the Sony was really impressive, and it's the first EVF that I've used where with a scene like this I could clearly see all the detail in the reef, so I could compose the picture. I can remember there's a little Graysby fish hiding in behind the fan here. It's just got to load up, and I could see that through the viewfinder when I was shooting, even though it's tucked away. So I could see that. Unfortunately it never actually popped out into the picture, it stayed hidden, but at the same time I could also see this diver who was just another photographer passing by, but I could see that diver in the background of my picture, and as a result I could utilize them in my composition. And I think that's been one of the complaints about EVFs across the board, is actually that it's very hard to see both the reef and the background in these types of scenes with an EVF. And I would say that the Sony is the first camera that I've been perfectly content with its ability with these types of images. It's not as good as an optical viewfinder for this type of image, but it's perfectly usable. And then there's so many areas that it's better than an optical viewfinder that, for me, on balance, that's one of the reasons I found the camera so nice to use. Anyway, back to the photos. This is a pair of grunts squaring off for a territorial dispute, and they do this mouth gaping display to each other to decide who's the top dog. And in this case here, what I like about this picture is actually they're two different species of grunts. The one on the left is a blue stripe grunt, the other one is a white grunt. And I've never seen the two species sort of doing this behaviour before, so that's really interesting to see. And that's why I sort of like this picture. It was also actually a great catch for the camera, because this was only going on very briefly, and the camera just locked on focus-wise, and I was able to get these pictures as a kind of a reaction type shot. This is a picture just with inward lighting, this time not using beam restrictors, but using the retroreflectors to do the inward lighting, giving a really harsh effect, a really different effect to the image. Certainly not a naturalistic type shot, but graphically really quite interesting, I think, of this brown tube sponge against the silhouetted reef. Some kittiwake pictures. I think all these pictures are from one dive on the kittiwake, the first dive on the kittiwake, and I've just begun processing pictures from this trip. This is Phoebe by the bow of the kittiwake. This was just taken at the end of the dive, actually. A lot of people had gone up by this point. The wreck was nice and clean and clear, and Phoebe was just swimming around on the wreck, actually, and I was like, ooh, 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 and I overtook her, and then to get her into this position, because I hadn't talked to her about modelling for the shot or anything beforehand, I made her swim out into the blue and then back towards the wreck. And then when she came in on this angle, it was a bit more interesting than when she was just swimming along parallel to the wreck. And then this is a photo of both Phoebe and Sam at the stern of the wreck, taken a few minutes earlier. We're going back in time with these pictures. This is a room I really like on the kittiwake with this double window. Looks out over the rear deck. It's obviously some sort of operations room. I've always photographed it. It's got nice sponge growth in it. And on this particular occasion, I had these two dog snappers as well. This is very much a grab shot in that I wanted to go and shoot this room, but didn't know the fish were there. We quickly got set up and tried to capture a frame while the fish were in a reasonable pose. And Sam was sort of just swimming into shot here. So it's not a perfect pose from her, not her fault. And also this room, although it looks horizontal, is now almost vertical. So that's why Sam is kind of on that funny angle. You can see from where the bubbles are going, kind of the angle of reality. But I chose to shoot this one this way because the snapper was sitting at this angle. So the snappers were sort of staying horizontal to the deck, even though the deck was not horizontal. This is the funnel of the smokestack of the kittiwake. And we usually use this as a frame for silhouette shots. But because Sam had this lovely red suit and red mask, I beckoned her closer and used a bit of flash. I don't think the inside of the funnel looks very nice with the flash, but the red suit looks fantastic. So I guess I could just make everything blue in Photoshop, or in Lightroom. But I chose to leave this more naturalistic feel of just the light being on her and some light around. This is a favourite setup of mine, but a really difficult place to shoot. This is the entrance to one of the decompression chambers on the Kittiwake. And when the wreck sat horizontally, these were very easy to shoot and very good to shoot in. But now these sit almost vertically. They're really hard to work in because they're hard to go in and out of without stirring everything up. The moment you breathe, you create a massive cloud of dust and particles coming out of them. So you have to, as a photographer, swim into them, swim to the end, turn around and swim back and get into position for your photo, get everything set up for your photo, and then call your buddy in to pose for you, all without breathing, because the moment you breathe, it's backscatter city. And you just generally get one shot at this. And so I tend to do one on each dive just because I can't resist doing them. And I know that I'll have to wait another dive or at least another 30 minutes to have the chance for the water to be clear and to do the shot again. They used to be obviously really good photographic things when the wreck was more horizontal. The sponge growth on the Kittiwake has become really impressive in recent years. Most of this sponge growth is, grown in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's really, really attractive. And so it's something that, as part of my sort of series of documenting the growth on the wreck, I always like to photograph each year. So this is Sam swimming past some of the superstructure with sponges growing on the winches at the front of the wreck. Generally, tropical wrecks colonise slightly slower than temperate wrecks because a lot of temperate encrusting life tends to grow a bit faster. It's a bit more seasonal, colonises quickly, grows quickly. Tropical wrecks take longer for corals and sponges to grow on them. But it is great to see these sponges and this colour coming onto the wreck. You can see how much the wreck is tilted over in this picture. Again, one of the challenges now shooting the Kittiwake is trying to find angles somewhere between the horizontal of reality and the angle on the wreck that looks nice. And it often means sort of for the model, they're sort of twisted at weird angles so that the picture looks reasonably presentable. And it's often best not to have them breathing because otherwise the bubbles are often going off at a funny angle. This is a great example of that. This picture is taken looking almost vertically upwards. This passageway is very nice going through the wreck. You can actually see the sun through the passageway, which shows you how much of a vertical picture it is. To shoot this as a photographer, that's quite a challenge because if you breathe out, your bubbles are in the picture. So you tend to have to shoot this picture as a, by holding your breath. And then I swim out of frame, breathe, come back in and swim and shoot some more shots. It's very difficult for the model as well because, first of all, there's this railing in the way, which is nice for the photo, but it's also in the way. You have to get very well positioned not to get blocked by the railing. And then also for them, they're swimming vertically downwards, trying to look reasonably neat. So it's actually quite a different setup. But the good thing about it being an overhang is that it's now also encrusted with colour. So very, very attractive. This is a tiny spiny head blenny, a macro shot taken with the SMC1, I think. This is a very young spiny head blenny. And I love the setting with it in this hole, in the brown sponges, surrounded by the zoanthids. This wasn't a good hole for a spiny head blenny. I think this one was only living there temporarily. And certainly when I went back about a week later to see if it was still there, it wasn't. So I think it's found a better hole now. But it was a great hole to have one. And they usually like smaller holes that are about the size of their body. But because it was surrounded by these beautiful flowers, which are obviously, they're actually zoanthids, sort of tiny little anemone-like polyps, I think it was really great. And then because he was young, he just had such great colours. Spiny head blennies don't normally have bright orange eyes like this, certainly not in Cayman. They're normally much greener around the eyes. And this guy's got amazing colours. I really love the colours on this individual. So yeah, he was a really lucky opportunity. And then I think this is the final picture. This one was taken again for the review. This is a black cap basslet. It's a small, like a fairy basslet, small little reef fish. But these live deep. They kind of replace fairy basslets at depth. And they've got colours that keep them camouflaged at depth. So although they're bright in the photo, underwater they're kind of a very dark blue purple. And then they've got a black face and their eye is hidden in that black face. So they're a really good autofocus challenge because they're a not particularly cooperative fish, and it's very hard to get the eye sharp. And for me, testing the Sony on this really impressed me with how good its autofocus was, because these aren't easy subjects to shoot, and the camera really didn't have any problem with them at all. So I think that's our collection for now. As I said, I'll be back regularly to do more of these because I should be processing plenty of pictures in the coming weeks, and so should have a nice batch to talk about every week. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.